2012, I was living in Rome for the summer. My apartment was very close to the Colosseum, but I was working as an undergraduate visiting researcher at the university. Every day, I would walk to and from work, which took about 35 to 40 minutes. One evening, I decided to take an alternate route that would shave off some time from my walk. Normally, I would have went through the main termini where all the people and shops are. This new route, however, had me cross the tracks further down from the actual station. As I got closer to the tracks, I noticed the area began to look really rough and that there were a lot of homeless people hanging around. I power walked through it and just avoided eye contact with everyone and eventually reached a small traffic tunnel. About halfway through, I felt someone come up behind me. He smelled terrible and was almost certainly foreign, as his Italian had a very, very thick accent, and he didn't look Italian. My Italian also wasn't very good at that point, and I couldn't really understand what he was saying. So I said, "Dispiace, non parlo Italiano." The guy still wouldn't stop talking to me, even though he knew I couldn't understand what he was saying. I just assumed he really wanted money or something, but would go away on his own when he figured out I wasn't going to give him any. We reached the end of the tunnel, and I was doing my best to just ignore him. I looked around and noticed the streets were abandoned, even though it was just after rush hour. I turned to him at some point and said, "Basta, stop, that's enough." But he just kept following me and talking. I'd begun to get nervous, but because he wasn't doing anything really threatening, I wasn't overly worried. When I reached a small stoplight, though, the guy's hand reached down and tugged at the bottom of my dress and sort of started to lift it. At this point, I felt threatened and swung my bag at him, which made him stagger a little. It was my laptop bag and was pretty heavy. It was enough for me to take off in a bit of a sprint. However, I noticed when I looked back, the guy was still following me, just now at a small distance. I kept jogging until I finally reached a small grocery store and ran inside. The guy was right at my heels. At this point, he was directly behind my back, so close I could feel his body heat. He then started reaching for my elbow like he was going to drag me out of the store. I shoved him off again and ran up to two other girls who were by the produce and seemed to be around my age, asking if they spoke English. When they said yes, I motioned to the guy behind me and told them the man had been following me since the train tracks. The girls' faces turned pretty serious at that point, and they started speaking rapidly to the guy in Italian. They then turned back to me and asked whether I knew him and told me that he was saying he was my boyfriend and that we had just been in a fight and I was lying. I told them I'd never met him before and had no idea who he was. I'd say that the fact that he couldn't speak English and that my Italian was limited to telling people I couldn't speak Italian and asking for the bathroom made them certain that there was little way the guy actually knew me. One of the girls then left to get the manager, who promptly threw the man out and told me he was watching on the monitors to make sure he went away. After the manager realized the man wouldn't go away and having him attempt to re-enter the store about half an hour later, he called the police. The police arrived, and I told them my story. By that point, the guy seemed to have finally left, probably scared off when he saw the police coming. The manager then gave me a ride back to my apartment, so the guy couldn't follow me, just in case he was still lurking around. Luckily, that was the end of that, and I never walked past the train tracks again. I think I got lucky to have found the store, but it still taught me a very valuable lesson about being careful about the areas you venture in new cities. Now I ask the locals for areas to avoid instead of wandering around foreign cities on my own. Let me preface this story with a few things. I'm not the best writer, and I've not posted here before, nor do a lot of people know this happened to me. I'm turning 22 at the end of the month, and this event happened almost a decade ago, yet I still remember it so clearly. I still think on it often and bring it up to my family, as uncomfortable as it makes us. It reminds us on how dangerous the world really is. As a little backstory, growing up, I've always had extremely fair skin, blonde hair, and light eyes. The kind of thing that specific creeps unfortunately go for. When I was around the bend of becoming a teenager, my older sister, 8 years ahead of me, was in the military and had been gone for quite some time now. However, she was finally coming back home to old USA soil, a few states away at a base in Kentucky. My parents and I were excited and planned to leave for the weekend so we could finally go see her for the first time in years. It would only be a few days, but we were happy regardless. We ended up seeing her, of course, and had a few days to be able to go out and eat, open her accumulated Christmas presents, and go to a nearby mall in proximity to the hotel we'd been at. I'd never seen someone so happy just to wear regular civilian clothes. Right from the get-go, our last night together felt odd as we walked this mall. Just one of those creepy vibes you get from an unfamiliar area. It wasn't too long until closing, and at this time frame, malls closed at about 10 p.m. or so. I'm sure you know what happens at malls. You go in and look at everything. Unbeknownst to us at the time, the four of us come across the last store we would be stopping at for the night before leaving. We walk in, and it's not particularly a store we'd go into. Expensive streetwear clothing. Like the pesky 12-year-old I was, I go back and forth, pestering my mom and dad walking around the store, as my sister looks around as well. Suddenly, my sister walks over to my mother as I'm near my dad and whispers something to her. A man with the most defined black mustache I remember had been tailing us and doing the typical retail routine. "Hi, is there anything I can help you with? Can I help you find something?" But he's being too persistent and only asking my dad these things. The man didn't speak broken English, but his accent was incredibly thick, perhaps Indian or Turkish, we think. My sister and mother walk out of the store and keep eyeing back at my dad, the "all right, let's go now" look. Now me, being 12, feeling even worse vibes. I don't understand why my mom and sister are wanting to leave so badly, but I start to catch up to them regardless. As my dad starts noticing us leaving, he begins to walk out as well, but the man stops him as I'm still in earshot. I found out at this point, the man had been staring at me almost the whole time, with my aloofness to the situation. He looked away from me and to my dad and asks, "So, how much for the little one?" My dad, visibly confused, chuckles uncomfortably, thinking it's some kind of really tasteless and bad joke. My mom and sister don't hear this and are still waiting for myself and my dad to catch up several feet away. "What?" My dad furrows his brow and replies, hoping for some kind of explanation. The man proceeded to say that he wanted to purchase me. Visibly protective dad mode now, and realizing the man is completely serious. "We don't do that here." His rising tone was palpable, and he starts hurrying me away to mom and sis, and we start leaving as he tells them what just happened. The whole drive back to the hotel, my sister is just consistently getting more upset, saying if she'd known, she'd kill the fucker. And honestly, I'm not sure there's really anything we could have done. But regardless, the entire situation was beyond uncomfortable, especially now that I realized the implications of what was going on. So, creepy mustache man, please, let's not meet ever again. I can scarcely imagine what kind of life you lead behind closed doors. This incident occurred about 11 years ago and involved 4 people. My sister, 10, my cousin, 10, his sister Kate, 12, and me, 12. It was a half day at school, so we got out at around 11:30. and walked to a pizza place about 3 blocks from my house. I know a lot of parents these days wouldn't let kids our age walk around a town without supervision, but we lived in a pretty small, tight-knit community. Anyway, when we left the pizza place, I noticed an older guy, maybe in his 50s or 60s, standing outside the door. I really only noticed him because he looked unkempt, stained oversized white shirt, and baggy sweats, and we didn't have many homeless people around town back then. I didn't really give him a second thought, and we stopped into the corner store for some candy and snacks. But then, he was waiting outside that store, too. I lingered a bit to let my younger sister and cousin walk ahead, something one of my older sisters taught me. Kate had the same suspicion I did, so we decided to test it. We deliberately stopped walking as he was crossing the street, and he stopped dead in his tracks, looking casually away when we turned to look at him. So this was one of those shit moments. We knew this guy was following us, but we didn't know what to do. We didn't want to walk home, especially since I only lived with my mom. We also didn't have cell phones. We walked down our block, and of course, he followed, which was another shit moment. So we decided to separate to knock on a couple of our neighbors' doors. One of our friends answered, but his parents weren't home, so he invited us into his backyard to play. While we were back there playing, this guy stood out front and just watched us, waiting. Finally, this kid who lived next door came by the backyard, and we went with him to tell his dad what was up. His dad came out to talk to the guy, who was standing in front of his house now, and their conversation went something like this. Kid's dad: "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Guy: "I live in this house." Points to the dad's house. Kid's dad: "No, you don't. I own this house. Why don't you get out of here? I don't want to see you around here again, or I'll call the cops." The guy went on his way, and we finally went home to tell my mom what happened. I saw him a few weeks later at a local boardwalk concessions place. I don't remember if he saw me, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what his plan was. There were 4 of us, then 6 when we went to the backyard. Maybe he was waiting for one of us to separate from the group. Maybe he just enjoyed watching little kids. I honestly don't know if I want to know. Guy who followed us home, I hope we never meet again. Hello, my lovely friends. Before the video ends, I just wanted to say that I hope that you're having a good end of the year. I know that this time can be hard for some, but I hope that you're still having a good month. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate you. Stay safe and sweet dreams.